Hello there, dear listener. Welcome back to another gentle journey through history. Tonight, we're going to drift together into the medieval world to discover what knights really did when they weren't charging into battle or performing grand deeds of chivalry. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel yourself sinking into comfort. Tonight's story might surprise you, because the knights of old, they were far more human than the legends suggest. Far more playful, far more mischievous, and infinitely more entertaining than any troubadour's tale would have you believe. Imagine for a moment the heavy wooden doors of a great castle creaking open in the evening light. The stone corridors echo with distant laughter, the clatter of dice, the splash of water, the sound of grown men arguing about whether a chicken can really swim, and sounds that might make you smile, or perhaps blush, depending on your sensibilities. The year is 1180, somewhere in the rolling countryside of medieval France, where autumn mist clings to ancient stone walls, where tapestries flutter in drafty corridors, and where the most fearsome warriors of their age spend their days engaged in activities that would make their chroniclers, well, perhaps edit their accounts rather heavily. If you're settling in for sleep, or just need a peaceful companion for your evening, you've come to the right place. And if this brings you comfort, perhaps you might share it with someone else who could use a little rest. Or a gentle reminder to subscribe if these stories help you find peace, but we'll speak of that softly later, when the tale has woven its way into your dreams. But for now, let yourself sink deeper into your pillows as we step back nearly 1,000 years to meet the real knights in all their very human glory, their magnificent foolishness, their elaborate pranks, their genuine friendships, and their remarkable ability to find entertainment in absolutely anything. Picture stone walls 3 feet thick, narrow windows that let in golden morning light, the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, the sound of horses in distant stables, and somewhere in this ancient fortress, men who could kill a dozen opponents in battle, but who can't seem to find their own swords after a particularly festive evening. Picture, if you will, the year 1180, somewhere in the rolling countryside of medieval France. The morning mist clings to stone walls that have stood for generations, built by men who understood that castles should be impressive, intimidating, and above all, capable of withstanding both military siege and the kind of parties that legendary knights throw when left to their own devices. A knight named Sir Geoffrey de Montfort awakens not to the sound of battle horns, but to his own thunderous snoring and the gentle complaints of his wife Eleanor, who has been trying to sleep beside what sounds like a very large, very drunk bear attempting to breathe through a reed instrument. The stories tell us that knights were paragons of virtue, always noble, always pure, always ready for righteous combat, rising with the sun to practice their martial skills, spending their days in contemplation of higher ideals, their evenings in courtly pursuits worthy of song and story. But Eleanor knows better, as she watches her husband stumble from their bed, his hair pointing in 17 different directions like a weather vane in a tornado, his expensive silk nightgown somehow twisted around him in ways that suggest either a very restless sleep or possibly an encounter with invisible wrestling opponents. He's searching desperately for something to cure the pounding in his head from last night's festivities. You see, the reality of knightly life was far different from the romantic tales. While the troubadours sang of courtly love and heroic deeds, the actual knights were dealing with very earthly concerns, like how to remove wine stains from expensive tunics, how to explain to the local priest why they'd been caught teaching inappropriate songs to the choir boys, and why the castle's prize rooster now seems to respond only to profanity. Sir Geoffrey, like most knights of his era, spent perhaps 1% of his life in actual combat, 1% in genuinely noble pursuits, and the remaining 98% in activities that ranged from the mildly embarrassing to the absolutely ridiculous. The rest, well, that's where our story becomes interesting and decidedly less noble. Let your breathing slow as we follow Sir Geoffrey through his day, watching him navigate the complex social world of medieval nobility, where boredom was the real enemy, where entertainment had to be created from whatever materials were at hand, and where grown men, with the power of life and death over their subjects, spent remarkable amounts of time figuring out new ways to embarrass each other. The morning sun streams through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor that's covered with rushes and herbs, supposed to keep insects away and freshen the air. Though Geoffrey suspects the herbs were chosen more for their ability to mask the lingering effects of whatever experimental beverages they'd been consuming the night before. Eleanor has already begun her day, overseeing servants with the efficiency of a military commander, managing the household with skills that would make a modern CEO envious. While Geoffrey is looking for his pants, which is more challenging than you might expect when you can't quite remember taking them off, or where, or possibly why there are chicken feathers involved. The bedroom around them tells its own story of medieval noble life. Tapestries depicting heroic scenes hang on stone walls. But if you look closely, some of those heroic figures bear suspicious resemblances to Geoffrey and his friends, and some of those heroic deeds look remarkably similar to last Tuesday's incident with the visiting bishop and the allegedly haunted privy. A wooden chest in the corner overflows with Geoffrey's belongings, expensive fabrics, weapons that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, books that he claims to read, but which Eleanor suspects he mainly uses as props when he wants to appear scholarly, and various mysterious objects that she's learned not to ask about. The morning routine begins as it always does, with Geoffrey attempting to remember what day it is, what responsibilities he might have forgotten, and whether the scratches on his arms are from his wife's cat, from last night's adventure in the rose garden, or from something involving Sir Rowland and a bet about whether armor could be used for purposes other than protection. The details remain mercifully unclear. Eleanor watches this daily ritual with the patient amusement of a woman who married for love, stayed married through humor, and has learned that the secret to a happy marriage with a medieval knight is maintaining a well-stocked supply of healing herbs and a flexible attitude toward what constitutes acceptable public behavior. As the sun climbs higher over the castle walls, Sir Geoffrey finally makes his way to the great hall, where breakfast awaits. But even this simple meal reveals the playful nature of medieval noble life. You see, knights had turned eating into an art form of elaborate pranks, social games, and competitions that would make modern dinner party hosts weep with envy, or possibly terror. The Great Hall itself is a marvel of medieval architecture, soaring stone arches that echo every sound, tapestries depicting biblical scenes and family histories, long wooden tables that can seat dozens, and high windows that let in golden morning light while keeping out most of the weather, most of the time, when the shutters work properly, which they haven't since Sir Rowland's experimental improvements last spring. The bread arrives, fresh from the oven, still warm and fragrant, but Sir Geoffrey examines it carefully, turning each piece over, peering at it from multiple angles, because yesterday his friend Sir Rowland had somehow convinced the kitchen staff to bake small wooden crosses into the center of several loaves, causing quite the surprise when Father Benedict tried to bless the meal and encountered what sounded like rattling bones. Medieval knights, you see, were masterful pranksters. They had endless time on their hands, the wealth to make mischief on a grand scale, and most importantly, they had each other as willing participants in increasingly elaborate schemes. Castle life was often months of tedium, punctuated by moments of genuine excitement. So they created their own entertainment with the dedication and creativity of professional entertainers. Picture the scene. Geoffrey tears his bread cautiously, while across the table, his young squire Thomas tries to hide his nervous laughter because Thomas knows what Sir Geoffrey doesn't yet, that his morning ale has been seasoned with a particularly potent herb that will have interesting effects on his digestive system throughout the day. Nothing dangerous, just musical, if you understand the meaning. The great hall echoes with quiet conversations, the scrape of wooden bowls against wooden tables, the soft footsteps of servants who've learned to move silently around nobles who may or may not be plotting something. But underneath the mundane sounds of breakfast, there's an undercurrent of anticipation, because every knight present is waiting to see who will be the victim or perpetrator of today's inevitable mayhem. Sir Geoffrey notices that Sir Rowland keeps glancing at him with barely contained amusement, the kind of look that immediately puts any sensible person on guard, because yesterday's wooden cross incident was mild compared to some of Rowland's previous schemes, like the time he convinced 3 visiting knights that the castle ghost could only be appeased by dancing naked around the chapel at midnight, while singing hymns backwards in what he claimed was ancient Celtic. The visiting knights, being both devout and slightly drunk, had actually attempted this ritual, leading to a theological discussion with Father Benedict that lasted 3 days and resulted in a new rule about acceptable forms of spiritual expression within castle grounds. Let yourself relax deeper as we watch these grown men, trained warriors, wealthy landowners, behave like mischievous schoolboys who never quite outgrew the joy of seeing authority figures flustered, finding elaborate ways to embarrass each other, to break the endless monotony of castle life, to prove that dignity is entirely optional when you're among friends. The morning meal continues, with each knight carefully watching the others, examining their food, testing their drinks, because in this world of martial law and rigid social hierarchy, pranks and jokes were one of the few ways to safely rebel, to find moments of genuine laughter in lives that could be suddenly and brutally short, to maintain the bonds of friendship that made survival possible. Eleanor enters the hall, surveying the scene with the weary wisdom of a woman who has seen too many of her husband's schemes. She nods politely to the gathered knights, while mentally calculating how much it will cost to repair whatever damage they inevitably cause today, and whether the castle's supply of medicinal herbs will be sufficient for the aftermath. She takes her place at the high table, the seat of honor reserved for the lady of the castle, and immediately notices that her chair has been modified. Somehow, the cushion seems fuller than usual, and there's a suspicious squeaking sound when she shifts her weight. She glances at her husband, who is suddenly very interested in his porridge, and realizes that today is going to be one of those days when being married to a knight requires considerable patience and possibly a sense of humor. The breakfast conversation flows around topics both serious and ridiculous: plans for the harvest, news from neighboring castles, debates about whether the new stable boy is actually a spy or just remarkably stupid, and a lengthy discussion about the proper way to remove berry stains from expensive fabric, which somehow leads to an argument about whether bears can be trained to perform household chores. This last topic is not entirely theoretical, as Sir Thomas had actually attempted to domesticate a small bear cub the previous summer, with results that were educational for everyone involved. The bear, whose name was Benedict, after the priest who blessed it, had indeed learned several household tasks. Unfortunately, these included opening wine barrels, untying horse reins, and what could generously be described as interior decorating. The bear now lives happily in the forest, and the castle still bears, so to speak, evidence of its residence. After breakfast, as the morning light grows stronger and filters through the great hall's high windows. Sir Geoffrey and his companions migrate to what they euphemistically call the gaming chamber, though the local priest refers to it less charitably as that den of iniquity where grown men go to prove they have more money than sense. Here, in this stone-walled room filled with tables, chairs, and the accumulated wisdom of countless bad decisions, knights would spend hours engaged in activities that were, well, let's say they wouldn't appear in any chivalric romance. The sound of dice hitting wooden tables echoes through the stone room, accompanied by creative cursing in 3 different languages, some of which may have been invented specifically for gaming purposes. Sir Geoffrey settles into his favorite chair, a massive wooden throne-like seat that has witnessed countless fortunes won and lost, mostly lost, and which bears carved initials from previous occupants, including what appears to be a detailed map of someone's debts. Medieval gambling was an art form unto itself. Knights would bet on anything, absolutely anything that could have an uncertain outcome. The weather. Which horse would be the first to relieve itself in the morning courtyard? How many times Father Benedict would clear his throat during Sunday Mass, whether the castle cat would catch more mice than the castle dog would catch rats. The creativity was endless, often ridiculous, and occasionally profound in its absurdity. Picture Sir Roland, carefully counting out silver coins, preparing to wager everything on a game they call Devil's Bones, which involves throwing dice while attempting to predict outcomes based on increasingly complex criteria. Today's particular twist involves predicting not just the numbers, but the exact sound the dice will make when they hit the table, the direction they'll roll, and whether any will fall onto the floor, where they'll be retrieved by whichever knight is currently losing the most money. The room fills with gentle laughter as Sir Geoffrey reveals that he hasn't seen his ceremonial sword in 3 weeks, and strongly suspects his wife has hidden it after catching him using it to slice cheese during a midnight snacking expedition. The other knights nod knowingly because this is not an uncommon occurrence. Expensive weapons have a tendency to migrate throughout castle life, appearing in kitchens, gardens, stables, and occasionally in the most embarrassing locations imaginable. You see, these warriors, these supposedly fierce protectors of the realm, were remarkably absent-minded when it came to keeping track of their expensive equipment. Swords would be left propped against tavern walls after particularly convivial evenings. Armor pieces would be forgotten in various bedchambers, leading to awkward conversations with spouses. And don't even ask about what happened to shields after parties involving target practice and experimental beverages. The gaming continues, with stakes ranging from the monetary to the embarrassing to the genuinely creative. Sir Thomas, the youngest knight present and therefore the most eager to prove himself, has just wagered that he can convince the castle's sternest nun, Sister Margaret, to laugh before sunset. A bet that will require creativity, charm, possibly divine intervention, and certainly a complete lack of self-preservation instinct. Sister Margaret is known throughout the region for her devotion, her stern demeanor, and her ability to make grown men confess their sins simply by looking at them with disapproval. She has never been observed laughing, smiling, or displaying any emotion other than resigned patience with the moral failings of everyone around her. The other knights are already calculating the odds and planning Sir Thomas's funeral. Let your muscles relax as we watch these games unfold, the gentle click of dice against wood, the rustle of coins changing hands, the soft murmur of friendly arguments about rules that seem to change with each round depending on who's winning. It's a peaceful sort of chaos, the kind of ambient noise that could easily lull you towards sleep if you weren't busy marveling at the creative ways grown men find to part with their money. The gaming chamber represents something important in medieval castle life, a space where rigid social hierarchies could bend slightly, where a clever peasant-born squire might win a purse from a duke, where friendship mattered more than bloodline, at least until the wine wore off and everyone remembered who owed money to whom and who had embarrassing information about whom. Sir Geoffrey finds himself drawn into a particularly complex wager involving predicting the exact number of birds that will land on the castle walls during the next hour. This might seem impossible, but the knights have developed elaborate theories about bird behavior, weather patterns, seasonal migration, and the effect of kitchen smells on avian decision-making. They've been studying this seriously for months, with charts, diagrams, and what they claim is scientific methodology. The truth is, they're probably right about 40% of the time, which is better odds than most of their other bets, and certainly better than Sir Roland's legendary wager about whether he could teach a pig to sing, an experiment that cost him a considerable sum, disturbed the entire castle for weeks, and resulted in a pig that makes unusual noises but can't be said to actually sing, unless you're very generous with your definition of music. As the morning progresses, the stakes grow higher and the bets more creative. Someone wagers their best horse on whether the cook will drop something during the preparation of the midday meal. Another bets a week's earnings on the exact number of words the priest will use in his next sermon. The conversations flow between serious strategy, gentle teasing, and increasingly elaborate theories about probability, fate, and divine intervention in gambling outcomes. As the afternoon sun reaches its peak and streams through the gaming chamber windows, our knights face a decision that reveals much about medieval priorities and social customs. It's bath day, and this presents both opportunity for personal hygiene and entertainment of the most unexpected kind. You see, medieval bathing, at least for the wealthy, was far from the solitary, hurried affair you might imagine. You might picture medieval bathing as a rare, solitary, and rather grim necessity, but for the wealthy nobility, bath time was actually a social event, a chance for conversation, relaxation, and the kind of philosophical discussions that only seem to emerge when people are sitting naked in warm water with nowhere else to be. Sir Geoffrey and his friends have turned this into something approaching theatre, impromptu theatre of a most amusing variety. The castle's bathhouse is a marvel of medieval engineering, fed by natural hot springs that bubble up from deep beneath the castle foundations. The large stone basin can accommodate several knights at once, which has led to traditions that would make a modern spa owner, well, perhaps reconsider their career choices, or at least revise their liability insurance policies. Picture the scene. Sir Geoffrey enters the steamy chamber, where the stone walls glisten with moisture and the air is thick with warmth and the scent of herbs. Sir Roland is already soaking in the large circular basin, wearing nothing but a ridiculous felt hat that he claims helps his thinking by keeping his brain warm, though others suspect it's simply because he's vain about his receding hairline. The conversation immediately turns to philosophy, specifically, whether it's possible to prove you exist by the bubbles you create in bathwater. This might seem like sophisticated discourse, but you should know that both knights are slightly drunk on what they call bathing wine, a tradition that involves consuming large quantities of alcohol before, during, and after washing, ostensibly for medicinal purposes, but really because it makes everything more entertaining and philosophical discussions more profound, or at least louder. This bathing wine is a special blend that the castle's vintner creates specifically for bathhouse consumption. It's supposed to have healing properties, promote good health, and encourage deep thinking. What it actually does is make grown men debate whether water can be wet, whether stones can think, and whether the castle's cat is plotting against them, all while sitting naked in a stone tub like very large, very drunk, very philosophical babies. The bathhouse conversations covered every topic imaginable: politics, theology, the relative merits of different types of soap, the mysterious behavior of women, techniques for removing stubborn stains from various fabrics, detailed critiques of each other's personal hygiene habits, and elaborate theories about why some people sing in baths while others remain silent. As if the warm water unlocked different aspects of personality, Sir Geoffrey settles into the warm water with a satisfied sigh, noting that today someone has added lavender, which is either a thoughtful gesture meant to promote relaxation or part of an elaborate prank involving flowers that cause uncontrollable sneezing fits. With his friends, it could honestly go either way, and he makes a mental note to observe everyone's reactions carefully before fully submerging. The relaxing warmth of the bath, the gentle sound of water lapping against stone, the soft conversations echoing off vaulted ceilings, creates an atmosphere of surprising tranquility. These moments of genuine relaxation were precious in medieval life, when privacy was rare, comfort even rarer, and the opportunity to sit still without someone demanding your attention was practically miraculous. But even bath time couldn't escape the knight's irrepressible tendency toward mischief and experimentation. Sir Thomas appears with what he claims is a new type of bathing salt from distant lands, acquired from a traveling merchant who spoke very little of any recognizable language. The salt is an unusual shade of blue-green and makes the water tingle in ways that seem questionable. The knights debate whether this is poison, magic, or just very expensive soap while continuing to soak in it. Let yourself sink deeper into relaxation, imagining the gentle warmth, the steam rising from ancient stone, the comfortable camaraderie of friends who've known each other for decades, sharing stories, engaging in gentle teasing, and occasionally breaking into the kind of splash fights that inevitably erupt when grown men gather in warm water with nothing but time on their hands and a competitive spirit that extends to everything, including who can make the biggest waves. The bathhouse also served as an informal council chamber, where important decisions were made in an atmosphere of enforced equality. It's hard to maintain dignity or social pretensions when you're naked in warm water, so conversations tended toward honesty, sometimes brutally so. This is where real business got discussed. Alliances were formed, secrets were shared, and occasionally, where friendships were tested by debates about whose turn it is to get more wine. Today's philosophical discussion centers on the nature of cleanliness itself. Sir Roland argues that true cleanliness is spiritual rather than physical, while Sir Geoffrey maintains that anyone who's spent time around horses knows that physical cleanliness is its own form of virtue. Sir Thomas, perhaps influenced by the mysterious bathing salts, proposes that cleanliness is actually a state of mind that has nothing to do with soap or water. This leads to a detailed examination of various cultural approaches to bathing: the Romans with their elaborate bathhouses, the Greeks with their athletic cleansing rituals, various barbarian tribes with their alternative approaches to hygiene, and a lengthy discussion about whether the castle's cats have the right idea about cleaning themselves. The conversation grows more philosophical as the wine takes effect, and more entertaining as inhibitions dissolve along with soap. The knights share stories of their worst hygiene-related embarrassments. Sir Geoffrey's tale of attending a formal feast with what he thought was mud but turned out to be something considerably worse. Sir Roland's account of a week-long hunt where soap was forgotten and rivers were frozen. Sir Thomas's description of trying to bathe in a stream while wearing armor, which resulted in nearly drowning in 3 inches of water while making sounds like a very large, very distressed metal animal. As the afternoon progresses, more knights arrive for their own bathing sessions, and the conversations expand to include topics like whether fish bathe, how clouds stay clean, and why some people smell good naturally, while others require considerable assistance from soap herbs, and prayers to various saints associated with personal hygiene. As evening approaches and the bathhouse empties, our knights face their daily cultural obligations. Medieval nobility was expected to appreciate the finer arts, music, poetry, courtly entertainment, and sophisticated conversation. But Sir Geoffrey and his companions have, well, let's say they've developed their own interpretation of cultural refinement, one that would make traditional minstrels weep. Though whether from laughter or despair remains unclear, the Great Hall has been arranged for the evening's entertainment. Torches cast dancing shadows on stone walls hung with tapestries depicting heroic scenes. Though if you look closely, some of those heroic figures bear suspicious resemblances to the current inhabitants of the castle. And some of those heroic deeds look remarkably similar to last month's incident with the missing wine barrels and the allegedly haunted cellar. Sir Roland has convinced a traveling minstrel, a young man with an optimistic expression and a finely tuned lute, to teach the assembled knights a new song, allegedly a romantic ballad from distant lands, something sophisticated and cultured that will demonstrate their appreciation for higher art. But as the evening progresses, it becomes clear that either the minstrel has a wicked sense of humor, or Sir Roland has been creative with the translation, because the lyrics are decidedly unsuitable for mixed company. Picture Eleanor sitting at the high table, trying to maintain her dignity and her composure as her husband and his friends enthusiastically sing what they believe is a tender love song about shepherds and sheep, while the actual words describe agricultural practices in terms that would make a farmer blush and possibly file complaints with local religious authorities. The minstrel, to his credit, maintains perfect professional composure while accompanying this musical catastrophe. Medieval knights took their musical obligations seriously and they were expected to compose poetry, perform songs, demonstrate cultural sophistication, and contribute to the artistic life of their communities. The results were variable. Sir Geoffrey's latest composition, an epic poem about his horse, somehow manages to rhyme noble steed with words that probably shouldn't appear in polite verse and definitely shouldn't be sung in front of clergy. The evening continues with each knight attempting to outdo the others in artistic expression. Sir Thomas recites what he claims is classical Latin poetry, though the Latin scholars present begin to suspect he's making up words, combining genuine classical phrases with creative sound-alikes that mean absolutely nothing but sound impressively scholarly, especially when delivered with dramatic gestures and meaningful pauses. His performance includes phrases like equus magnificus ridiculosis, which he claims means the magnificent horse of wonder, but which actually translates to something like magnificently ridiculous horse, if it means anything at all. The Latin scholars are too polite to correct him, and too entertained to interrupt. Let the gentle rhythm of medieval music wash over you, the soft plucking of lute strings, the warm timbre of voices raised in song, even if the songs themselves are, well, educational in unexpected ways. The flickering torchlight creates dancing shadows on stone walls, the comfortable warmth of the great hall filled with people, the laughter of friends enjoying each other's company. Even when that enjoyment comes at the expense of artistic tradition, the cultural entertainment reveals something endearing about these medieval knights. They tried, they really did, to live up to the ideals of their time, to be learned, artistic, sophisticated contributors to civilization. But their humanity kept breaking through, their tendency toward humor, their delight in the ridiculous, their fundamental inability to take themselves too seriously for too long. Eleanor eventually retires, claiming fatigue but actually unwilling to witness what happens when her husband attempts his dramatic interpretation of classical mythology, which involves props, sound effects, audience participation, and a level of physical comedy that threatens both furniture and dignity. She's learned that some artistic expressions are best observed from a safe distance, or not at all. The evening's entertainment reaches its peak when Sir Roland decides to demonstrate his newly acquired skill at juggling, using objects that were never intended for such purposes, including several expensive goblets, a small dagger, and what appears to be a piece of fruit but might actually be something else entirely. The performance begins with impressive competence, but medieval halls weren't designed for juggling, especially by someone whose depth perception may have been affected by the evening's wine consumption. The inevitable crash, when it comes, involves not just the juggling props but also a tapestry, 2 chairs, and a small table that had been holding someone's dinner. The sound echoes through the stone hall like a very expensive avalanche, followed by the kind of silence that precedes either laughter or serious consequences. Fortunately, the assembled audience chooses laughter, because this is exactly the kind of artistic interpretation they've come to expect from their evening entertainment. Unpredictable, memorable, and requiring minimal cleanup compared to some previous cultural presentations. The musical portion of the evening continues with group singing, where the knights attempt to harmonize on songs they may or may not remember correctly. The results sound like what you might expect when a dozen slightly drunk warriors try to sing together without professional guidance. Enthusiastic, heartfelt, and only occasionally recognizable as actual music. As full darkness settles over the castle and the first stars appear in the clear autumn sky, torches are lit throughout the great hall, candles appear on every surface that won't catch fire, and the evening meal begins. But calling it merely a meal would be like calling a hurricane merely weather. Medieval feasts were theater, comedy, competition, social commentary, and then chaos, all served together on pewter plates with a side of entertainment that money couldn't buy. Sir Geoffrey takes his place at the high table, the seat of honor that comes with being master of the castle, though tonight he's beginning to suspect that honor might be more burden than privilege. He notes with growing concern that the kitchen staff seem unusually cheerful tonight, exchanging meaningful glances and suppressing giggles, which historically has meant either very good news, very embarrassing consequences, or both simultaneously. The great hall fills with the usual evening crowd, knights and their families, visiting dignitaries, local clergy, servants, and various hangers-on who appear whenever food is involved. The conversations create a gentle buzz of human activity, the kind of background sound that speaks of community, warmth, and people genuinely enjoying each other's company. The first course arrives with appropriate ceremony, carried by servants who are clearly struggling to maintain professional composure. But sharp-eyed observers might notice that Sir Roland's portion seems to be moving slightly. Upon closer inspection, his meat has been artfully arranged to resemble something that would be more appropriate in a stable than on a dinner table, though the kitchen staff would certainly claim it was purely accidental, if asked, which they probably won't be. Roland examines his plate with the careful attention of a military strategist planning a siege, trying to determine if this is accident, artistic license, or deliberate provocation requiring retaliation. The meat continues to maintain its interesting configuration, while Roland debates whether eating it would be surrendering to the prank or calling the kitchen staff's bluff. Medieval feast entertainment was elaborate, interactive, and often completely unpredictable. Tonight's performers include a juggler who specializes in dangerous objects and seems to have learned his trade from Sir Roland, a storyteller whose tales grow more outrageous with each course and may actually be making them up as he goes along, and a musician whose instrument produces sounds that might charitably be described as unique, or less charitably as evidence that musical instruments can suffer from indigestion. Picture the scene unfolding like a carefully choreographed dance of chaos, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously in multiple languages, servants weaving between tables with platters and pitchers while avoiding the increasingly animated gestures of diners, dogs begging for scraps with the persistence of professional diplomats, children playing elaborate games of hide and seek among the tapestries, and over it all, the gentle chaos of people enjoying themselves without restraint or inhibition. Sir Geoffrey discovers that his wine cup has been modified. Somehow the kitchen staff has created a vessel that appears perfectly normal, but makes a soft whistling sound every time he drinks, causing nearby conversations to pause while everyone tries to locate the source of the mysterious noise. By the third course, half the hall is watching him drink, waiting for the whistle, which makes every sip a performance. The wine itself seems normal enough, though there's an unusual aftertaste that might be herbs, might be spices, or might be something the kitchen staff added for their own entertainment. Geoffrey decides not to investigate too closely, having learned that some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when they involve his friend's sense of humor and access to cooking facilities. The entertainment reaches its first peak when Sir Thomas attempts to demonstrate his newly acquired skill at sword dancing, which involves intricate footwork, precise blade work, and apparently a complete disregard for nearby furniture, valuable decorations, and basic principles of physics. The dance begins elegantly enough, with Thomas moving through traditional steps while manipulating his sword in patterns that are genuinely impressive. But medieval great halls weren't designed for choreographed sword work, especially by someone who may have been overly generous with the evening wine, and definitely by someone who tends to get carried away by his own enthusiasm. The inevitable collision when it involves not just furniture but also a serving table, two startled servants, and what might have been a very expensive vase if it hadn't been a very expensive pile of pottery fragments. Let yourself relax into the warmth and comfort of this medieval feast. The gentle glow of candlelight flickering on stone walls, the murmur of friendly conversation in half a dozen languages, the occasional burst of laughter when someone's entertaining efforts exceed their actual abilities. It's the sound of community, of people who genuinely enjoy each other's company, finding joy in simple pleasures and shared experiences. The evening meal continues long past what modern people might consider reasonable, because medieval feasts weren't just about food. They were about connection, storytelling, shared experiences, and the kind of relaxed socializing that's only possible when time moves slowly and entertainment creates itself from the raw materials of human personality and creativity. Eleanor watches from the high table as her husband attempts to resolve a heated debate about whether chickens can swim by volunteering to personally test the theory with the castle's prize rooster, a magnificent bird named Charlemagne who rules the courtyard with iron discipline and fierce pride. She intervenes before livestock can be involved, but not before placing a small wager on the outcome with Father Benedict, who claims theological interest in the question of avian aquatic abilities. The feast entertainment continues with increasingly creative performances. A young squire attempts to recite poetry while standing on his head, which works better in theory than in practice, especially when the poetry is supposed to rhyme. A visiting merchant demonstrates what he claims is a traditional dance from his homeland, though the knights suspect he's making it up as he goes along, based on the way the steps seem to change every few minutes. The storyteller regales the hall with tales of distant lands, magical creatures, and heroes whose adventures grow more improbable with each telling. Tonight's story involves a knight who could speak to animals, a dragon that collected shoes, and a princess who solved problems by cooking elaborate meals. The audience follows along enthusiastically, offering suggestions, corrections, and alternative endings that are often more entertaining than the original. As the evening progresses, the formal entertainment gives way to spontaneous performances by the guests themselves, Knights share stories of their most embarrassing moments. Ladies demonstrate skills they learned as children. Children show off tricks they've been practicing, and everyone contributes to a growing atmosphere of warmth, laughter, and genuine affection. As the feast winds down and the great hall gradually empties, most sensible people retire to their chambers for well-deserved rest. But you might expect our knights to be sensible. Then you haven't been paying attention to their approach to daily life. The darkness brings its own form of entertainment, adventures that range from the romantic to the ridiculous, often both simultaneously, and occasionally involving livestock. Though we try not to ask too many questions about that, Sir Geoffrey, emboldened by wine, good food, and the general merriment of the evening, decides this is the perfect time to serenade his wife, despite the fact that his singing voice has been compared unfavorably to a donkey in distress. And his lute playing suggests he learned the instrument by watching someone else play, from a considerable distance, possibly while blindfolded, and definitely while distracted by other activities. The castle's stone corridors carry sound in unexpected ways, amplifying some frequencies while muffling others. So Geoffrey's romantic gesture echoes throughout the building in ways that transform his tender ballad into something that sounds like a very large cat being tortured by a much smaller but more determined cat. The performance wakes sleeping babies, startles livestock in distant stables, and causes the night guards to debate whether they're under attack, witnessing some sort of supernatural phenomenon, or simply experiencing the natural consequences of allowing knights access to musical instruments after dark. Medieval castles after nightfall were full of mysterious sounds, creaking timbers settling after the day's warmth, stones expanding and contracting with temperature changes, distant conversations floating through corridors, the scurrying of small animals in the walls, and the occasional romantic adventure that didn't go quite as planned. Tonight promises to be one of those nights when the castle's residents will have stories to tell for weeks. Sir Roland, not to be outdone in matters of nocturnal courtship, embarks on his own romantic mission, attempting to serenade a lady who has caught his attention. Unfortunately, his sense of direction, never reliable under the best circumstances, has been further compromised by the evening's festivities. He spends the better part of an hour trying to serenade what turns out to be a tapestry depicting St. Catherine, who, while undoubtedly virtuous, is not particularly responsive to romantic overtures. The tapestry, a magnificent piece of medieval art depicting the saint's martyrdom, receives Roland's complete repertoire of love songs, romantic poetry, and increasingly desperate attempts at conversation. He even attempts to dance for her, a performance that would be touching if it weren't being directed at woven wool. The night guards, making their rounds, discover him deep in philosophical discussion with the saint about the nature of divine love and whether it's possible for a mortal man to win the heart of a religious icon. Picture the gentle absurdity of it all. Grown men, trained warriors, wealthy landowners who hold the power of life and death over thousands of subjects, creeping through dark corridors like mischievous children, trying to be romantic, or impressive, or at least competent, and failing in ways that are both endearing and deeply entertaining. Their adventures become the stuff of castle legend, stories that will be retold with embellishment for generations. The nocturnal adventures continue with Sir Thomas, who has convinced himself that the castle contains secret passages, hidden rooms, and possibly buried treasure. He spends considerable time pressing random stones in walls, looking for hidden mechanisms, listening for hollow sounds, and generally behaving like a very large, very drunk detective investigating mysteries that may or may not exist. He doesn't find any secret passages, but he does discover that Father Benedict has been hiding wine behind a loose stone in the chapel, a cache that appears to include some very fine vintages that were supposed to be reserved for religious ceremonies. This discovery leads to an impromptu theological discussion about the proper role of alcohol in religious life, the nature of temptation, and whether it's possible to achieve spiritual enlightenment through fermented grapes. Let yourself drift with these nighttime wanderers, following their gentle footsteps on stone floors worn smooth by centuries of use, listening to their whispered conversations that echo softly in vaulted corridors, sharing their quiet laughter that bubbles up despite their attempts at stealth. It's the kind of peaceful mischief that comes when people are relaxed, content, and just a little bit silly, when the formal constraints of daytime behavior give way to more fundamental human impulses. The night air is cool and fresh, carrying the scent of autumn leaves, wood smoke from dying fires, and the distant sounds of the countryside settling into sleep. Owls call from the forest beyond the castle walls. Night birds rustle in the eaves, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howls, though it might just be Sir Geoffrey attempting another song. As the hours pass, our knights gradually make their way back toward their chambers, though the journey takes considerably longer than it should, involving several wrong turns, at least one philosophical discussion about the nature of navigation, and what appears to be an impromptu contest to see who can walk the straightest line down a corridor. A contest that reveals interesting information about the effects of medieval wine on balance and coordination. Sir Geoffrey finally locates what he believes to be his bedroom, though he's not entirely certain it's the same room he started from, and there's some evidence that he may have accidentally entered the chamber of Sir Roland's mother-in-law, a formidable woman who is not amused by nocturnal visitors, especially ones who smell like wine and sing like wounded livestock. The confusion is resolved when Eleanor appears, having listened to his entire musical performance from the relative safety of their actual chamber. She guides her husband to the correct room with the patient efficiency of a woman who has had considerable practice at this particular task. She greets him with the patient smile of someone who married for love, stayed married through humor, and has learned that successful relationships require flexibility, understanding, and a well-developed sense of the ridiculous. Eleanor helps Geoffrey navigate the complex process of removing medieval clothing, a task that seems simple in daylight but becomes surprisingly challenging after an evening of festivities. There are laces to untie, buckles to unfasten, and various pieces of equipment that seemed essential earlier, but now appear to be deliberately designed to confuse intoxicated knights. The bedroom itself tells the story of their life together, tapestries they chose together hanging on stone walls, a large bed with curtains that provide privacy and warmth, chests filled with their possessions, books that Eleanor actually reads and Geoffrey pretends to understand, weapons that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, and various mysterious objects that accumulate when you live in a medieval castle and have friends with questionable judgment. As Geoffrey finally settles into bed, Eleanor shares the evening's observations from her perspective, the kitchen staff's elaborate pranks, the entertaining failures of various artistic performances, the theological implications of Sir Thomas's discovery in the chapel, and her growing suspicion that the traveling merchant who sold them the mysterious bathing salts may not have been entirely honest about their origins or effects. The conversation drifts towards sleep as they discuss plans for tomorrow, responsibilities that need attention, guests who require entertainment, and the ongoing project of maintaining a medieval castle filled with people who seem determined to turn everyday activities into opportunities for elaborate mischief. If you're still with me on this gentle journey through medieval mischief and nightly entertainment, drifting peacefully towards sleep while these ancient stories unfold, you might be wondering what lessons we can draw from these tales of courtly foolishness. And perhaps, if you're finding these stories soothing, you might consider sharing them with someone else, who needs a little peaceful distraction, or subscribing if these historical wanderings help carry you toward rest. The truth is, Sir Geoffrey and his companions teach us something profound about human nature, something that transcends the centuries between their time and ours. People have always found ways to laugh, to play, to find joy in simple pleasures, even in times and places we imagine as harsh, formal, or overly burdened by duty and responsibility. Medieval knights were bound by complex codes of honor that governed everything from their behavior in battle to their treatment of guests. They lived under religious obligations that required constant attention to moral and spiritual matters. They faced social expectations that demanded they serve as examples of virtue, nobility, and proper conduct, and they existed under the constant possibility of violent death, either in warfare, from disease, or from the countless hazards of medieval life. Yet despite all these constraints, all these burdens, all these very real dangers, they still found time for pranks, games, music, friendship, and the kind of gentle foolishness that makes life not just bearable, but actually enjoyable. They refused to let dignity override humanity. They insisted that even the most serious life needs moments of lightness. They understood instinctively that community is built through shared laughter as much as shared struggles. Perhaps there's profound wisdom in their approach to daily life, in their recognition that joy is not a luxury to be postponed until all serious matters are resolved, but rather a necessity that makes it possible to face serious matters with courage and resilience. They seem to understand that the ability to laugh at yourself, to find humor in difficult circumstances, to maintain friendships through playfulness and mutual teasing, these aren't signs of frivolity, but rather essential survival skills. As you continue to relax, letting your breathing slow and deepen, consider the timeless nature of human joy. The way people in every era have found reasons to smile, to tease their friends, to sing badly but enthusiastically, to tell stories, to gather around tables and share food and conversation, to create entertainment from whatever materials life provides. These fundamental human impulses connect us across centuries, across cultures, across all the apparent differences that separate one age from another. Sir Geoffrey would probably be both amused and honored to know that centuries later, people would find his misadventures soothing, that his very human failings would become a gentle bedtime story for people seeking peace and rest. He might even be proud, though he'd probably make some inappropriate joke about being remembered for his bathhouse philosophy rather than his martial prowess, or his skill at removing wine stains from expensive fabrics. The medieval world these knights inhabited was simultaneously more formal and more relaxed than our own. More formal in its social hierarchies, its religious obligations, its codes of conduct that governed public behavior, but more relaxed in its approach to time, its acceptance of human folly, its understanding that entertainment is a community responsibility and that everyone contributes according to their abilities. Whether those abilities involve juggling, storytelling, or simply providing amusing examples of what not to do. Consider how their approach to friendship differs from modern relationships. These knights saw each other daily, shared meals, participated in each other's adventures, knew each other's families, witnessed each other's triumphs and failures. Their friendships were built on years of shared experience, mutual support, and the kind of patient tolerance that comes from genuine affection. They could tease each other mercilessly because they also trusted each other completely. The castle settles into the quiet rhythms of morning routine as our story draws toward its close, servants beginning their daily tasks with the efficiency born of long practice, knights slowly emerging from chambers, some moving more carefully than others, the eternal cycle of medieval life continuing with new opportunities for mischief, new chances for laughter, new stories to be born from the endless creativity of people finding entertainment in whatever circumstances life provides. Eleanor supervises the breakfast preparation while calculating whether the castle's supply of medicinal herbs will be sufficient for whatever her husband and his friends accomplish today. Father Benedict prepares for morning prayers while wondering whether he should address the theological implications of last night's discoveries. The kitchen staff exchange meaningful glances while planning today's contributions to the ongoing entertainment of their noble employers. And somewhere in this ancient stone fortress, surrounded by friends who understand that the best defense against life's hardships is a well-developed sense of humor, Sir Geoffrey begins another day of adventures that will be remembered, embellished, and retold for generations of listeners seeking gentle stories and peaceful dreams. As morning light streams through the narrow windows of the great hall, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits in the golden air, word arrives that the castle will receive visitors today. This news transforms the usual peaceful chaos of daily routine into something approaching organized panic, because medieval hospitality was both a sacred obligation and an art form, and Sir Geoffrey's household takes both aspects very seriously. The visitors are a traveling party of minor nobility, including a young baron, his wife, their children, several knights, and the usual retinue of servants, guards, and hangers-on that accumulate around people of importance. They're traveling to attend a wedding in a distant castle, and tradition demands that they be received with all the ceremony, comfort, and entertainment that Geoffrey's household can provide. This presents both opportunity and challenge. On one hand, visitors bring news from the outside world, fresh stories, different perspectives, and the kind of social variety that makes castle life interesting. On the other hand, visitors also witness whatever entertainment their hosts provide, and Sir Geoffrey's approach to hospitality has gained something of a reputation throughout the region. Eleanor takes charge of the preparations with military efficiency, assigning tasks to servants, reviewing menus with the kitchen staff, ensuring that guest chambers are properly appointed, and quietly hiding anything that might be used as a prop in whatever performance her husband and his friends inevitably stage for their guests' amusement. The great hall is transformed. Tapestries are adjusted to cover stains from previous entertainments. Furniture is arranged to provide optimal viewing for whatever spectacle develops. Fresh rushes are spread on the floor, and candles are strategically placed to create the kind of warm, welcoming atmosphere that says distinguished guests are treasured here, rather than we weren't expecting anyone and we're improvising frantically. Sir Geoffrey and his companions retreat to the gaming chamber for emergency planning, which involves the kind of serious strategic discussion usually reserved for military campaigns. They debate various entertainment options, consider the preferences and sensitivities of their expected guests, and attempt to devise something that will be memorable without being scandalous, though their definition of not scandalous might differ significantly from more conventional interpretations. The challenge is complicated by the fact that their previous entertaining efforts have established certain expectations. Word has spread throughout the region about the castle where knights stage elaborate performances, where dinner is accompanied by entertainment that ranges from the impressive to the catastrophic, where guests never know whether they'll witness genuine artistry or inspired disaster. Let yourself relax into the comfortable bustle of preparation, the sound of servants moving purposefully through stone corridors, the gentle arguments about proper protocol, the underlying excitement that comes with anticipating new friends and fresh audiences for familiar stories. It's the kind of organized activity that speaks of community, tradition, and people who genuinely care about making others feel welcome. The visitors arrive in late morning, their horses clattering into the courtyard with the satisfying sound of shod hooves on cobblestones. Their party is larger than expected, more colorful, and apparently more entertaining than the usual run of traveling nobility. The young baron turns out to be something of a performer himself. His wife has a reputation as a storyteller, and their knights seem prepared for whatever entertainment their hosts might provide. This presents both relief and challenge. Relief because entertaining guests who appreciate performance is easier than trying to impress people who prefer quiet dignity. Challenge because performing for fellow entertainers raises the stakes considerably, and Sir Geoffrey's household has never been known to back down from a challenge, especially one that involves potential embarrassment on a grand scale. The formal greetings proceed according to proper protocol, with all the bowing, hand-kissing, and ceremonial exchanges that medieval courtesy requires. But underneath the formal politeness, there's an undercurrent of anticipation, the recognition that this evening's entertainment will be something worth remembering, though whether the memories will be fond or mortifying remains to be determined. The afternoon passes in a blur of preparation, conversation, and the kind of mutual sizing up that occurs when two groups of entertainers meet for the first time. Stories are shared, reputations are discussed, and various hints are dropped about the evening's planned festivities. The atmosphere builds towards something that promises to be either spectacular success or magnificent disaster. Sir Geoffrey finds himself in the unusual position of being nervous about performing for guests, not because he doubts his abilities, but because he's beginning to realize that his definition of entertainment might be more flexible than he'd previously considered. The thought of sophisticated guests witnessing his approach to cultural refinement creates a flutter of anxiety that wine doesn't seem to address adequately. Eleanor watches the preparations with the calm expression of someone who has learned to expect the unexpected. She's made contingency plans for various potential outcomes, arranged for medical supplies to be readily available, and composed several polite explanations for anything that might require official apology. Her preparations suggest either remarkable foresight or extensive experience with her husband's creative endeavors. Evening arrives with the kind of dramatic timing that seems designed for memorable events. The great hall has been transformed into a proper theatre, with torches providing flickering illumination, tables arranged to give everyone optimal viewing, and an atmosphere of expectation that you can almost taste in the warm air, scented with wood smoke and roasting meat. The feast begins with all appropriate ceremony. Multiple courses served with professional precision, wine flowing freely but not excessively, conversation flowing between hosts and guests with the easy rhythm of people who understand both courtesy and entertainment. But everyone present knows that the real show will begin when the formal meal concludes and the evening's planned entertainment commences. Sir Geoffrey has decided to present what he describes as a classical dramatic interpretation, though the classical nature of the performance becomes questionable the moment he appears wearing what can only be described as a toga. If togas were typically made from bed sheets, held together with decorative rope, and accessorized with a helmet that appears to have been borrowed from the castle's armory, the performance begins promisingly enough. Geoffrey delivers what sounds like genuine classical oratory, his voice carrying impressively through the stone hall, his gestures appropriately dramatic, his bearing sufficiently noble to suggest that he might actually know what he's doing. The audience settles in with the pleased anticipation of people about to witness something genuinely cultured. But classical drama, it turns out, requires props, and Sir Geoffrey has interpreted this requirement with characteristic creativity. His dramatic narrative about ancient heroes requires a sword, which he wields with actual skill, a shield. which he manipulates with less expertise, and what he describes as the sacred flame of inspiration, which appears to be a torch that he waves enthusiastically while delivering particularly emotional passages. The combination of weapon, shield, improvised costume, and open flame creates opportunities for physical comedy that classical dramatists probably never anticipated, especially when performed by someone who may have been overly generous with the pre-performance wine, and who has a tendency to get carried away by his own artistic vision. The audience watches with growing fascination as Geoffrey's classical hero battles invisible enemies, proclaims undying love to an imaginary maiden, and delivers stirring speeches about honor, duty, and the proper care of livestock, all while managing costume malfunctions, equipment failures, and what appears to be an ongoing negotiation with the torch about appropriate flame height. Let yourself be drawn into this medieval theater, the warm glow of torchlight on stone walls, the fascinated attention of an audience that can't quite predict what will happen next, the infectious enthusiasm of a performer who has absolutely committed to his artistic vision, regardless of conventional limitations like plot coherence or physical safety. Sir Roland, not to be outdone, follows with his own contribution to the evening's cultural program, a musical performance that he describes as traditional songs of courtly love, though his interpretation of tradition appears to be flexible. His lute playing has improved considerably since last we heard it, but his song selection seems designed to test the boundaries of what constitutes appropriate entertainment for mixed company. The songs themselves are melodically pleasant, expertly performed, and filled with romantic imagery that would be perfectly suitable if you don't listen too carefully to the lyrics, which describe agricultural activities, livestock management, and seasonal farming practices in terms that are educational, though perhaps not in the way that Roland intended. The visiting guests listen with the polite attention of people who recognize artistic effort when they see it, though their expressions suggest they may be having difficulty following the agricultural metaphors, or perhaps they're following them entirely too well. The performance continues with Roland apparently oblivious to the educational nature of his song selection, delivering each verse with the passionate sincerity of someone who believes he's performing refined romantic poetry. Sir Thomas contributes to the evening's entertainment with a demonstration of what he calls interpretive combat, which involves recreating famous battles through dance. The concept is genuinely innovative, combining martial skill with artistic expression in ways that could be genuinely impressive, if performed by someone with better coordination, clearer understanding of the battles being interpreted, and less enthusiasm for artistic improvisation. His performance begins with what he announces as the Battle of Hastings, though his version includes elements that historians might question, such as the apparent participation of dragons, the decisive role played by a heroic pig, and cavalry charges that seem to involve dancing rather than actual military tactics. The audience follows along gamely, trying to identify historical events in interpretive movements that grow increasingly creative as the performance continues. The evening reaches its peak when all three knights decide to collaborate on what they describe as an epic musical drama combining classical themes with contemporary innovation. This sounds impressive until it becomes clear that they haven't actually coordinated their individual contributions, leading to a performance that combines Geoffrey's classical oratory, Roland's agricultural love songs, and Thomas's interpretive combat simultaneously. The result is unlike anything previously witnessed in medieval entertainment, a spectacular collision of artistic visions that create something entirely new. Whether that something qualifies as art, entertainment, or natural disaster depends largely on your perspective and tolerance for creative chaos. The visiting guests watch with the kind of fascinated attention usually reserved for natural phenomena, unable to look away, uncertain what they're witnessing, but absolutely certain they'll be talking about it for years. Their children peer between their fingers with the mixed horror and delight of young people witnessing adults behaving in ways that definitely don't appear in etiquette manuals. Eleanor observes from the high table with the patient expression of someone who has seen similar performances before, though even she seems slightly uncertain about tonight's particular combination of artistic elements. She's positioned herself near the medical supplies, just in case, and has a servant standing by with what appears to be a large bucket of water, for reasons that become clear when Geoffrey's torch begins to interact unexpectedly with Roland's lute strings. The performance concludes with all three knights attempting to take a unified bow, which would work better if they could agree on when to bow, how deeply, and whether bowing while wearing improvised costumes and carrying various props is physically possible without outside assistance. The attempt creates a final moment of collaborative artistic achievement that perfectly summarizes the evening's approach to cultural refinement. The immediate aftermath of any memorable performance requires careful management, damage assessment, diplomatic conversation, and the kind of tactful explanation that transforms potential embarrassment into charming eccentricity. Fortunately, Eleanor has considerable experience with this particular type of crisis management. The visiting guests, after a moment of stunned silence, break into enthusiastic applause, though whether they're applauding artistic achievement or simply the fact that everyone survived the performance intact remains diplomatically unclear. Their expressions suggest they've witnessed something genuinely unique, which is probably accurate, though uniqueness doesn't always correlate with traditional measures of artistic success. Sir Geoffrey, still wearing his modified toga and looking remarkably pleased with the evening's cultural contribution, accepts congratulations with the gracious dignity of someone who believes he's just delivered a masterpiece of classical theatre. His costume has acquired additional character during the performance, including what appear to be scorch marks, wine stains, and possibly evidence of contact with the feast's main course. The young baron, who has witnessed considerable entertainment during his travels, declares tonight's performance to be unlike anything I've ever seen, which is probably both honest and diplomatic. His wife, noted for her storytelling abilities, seems to be mentally cataloging details for future retellings, though she may need to edit some elements for appropriate audiences. Sir Roland carefully puts away his lute, examining it for damage while humming what might be one of his agricultural love songs. The instrument appears to have survived its encounter with Geoffrey's torch, though there are signs that some of the strings may have been singed during particularly passionate passages, creating what Roland claims are interesting new tonal possibilities. Sir Thomas is attempting to untangle himself from his interpretive combat costume, which has become considerably more interpretive than originally intended. The process requires assistance from several servants, Eleanor's patient guidance, and what appears to be a small knife for dealing with knots that have achieved permanent status during the performance. Let yourself drift with the gentle chaos of artistic aftermath, the satisfied exhaustion of performers who have given their all to their craft, the warm conversations of guests trying to process what they've witnessed. The comfortable bustle of servants cleaning up after creativity has been unleashed in a medieval great hall. The evening continues with more conventional entertainment, storytelling that follows traditional narrative structure, music that observes conventional relationships between melody and harmony, and conversation that covers topics like weather, travel conditions, and mutual acquaintances without venturing into agricultural metaphor or interpretive historical analysis. But the formal entertainment has created the kind of relaxed atmosphere where genuine conversation becomes possible. Guests and hosts share stories about their own entertaining disasters, compare notes on the challenges of performing for medieval audiences, and discover common experiences with the gap between artistic ambition and practical achievement. The children, who had watched the performance with wide-eyed fascination, now attempt their own interpretive recreations, using dining implements as props and table linens as costumes. Their versions are considerably more comprehensible than the original, though this may simply reflect the clarity of young, artistic vision, uncomplicated by adult pretensions. As the evening winds down, guests retire to chambers that Eleanor has prepared with characteristic attention to comfort. Though she's also made sure that particularly valuable or fragile items have been temporarily relocated, just in case artistic inspiration strikes during the night hours. The castle settles into peaceful quiet, filled with the satisfaction that comes from hospitality successfully provided and entertainment memorably shared. Eleanor surveys the Great Hall, mentally calculating cleaning requirements, replacement costs, and diplomatic correspondence that may be needed to address any unintended consequences of the evening's cultural program. But her expression suggests satisfaction rather than regret, the look of someone who understands that memorable hospitality sometimes requires accepting a certain amount of creative chaos. Sir Geoffrey, finally freed from his toga and restored to normal clothing, joins his wife in reviewing the evening's successes and learning opportunities. They discuss improvements for future performances, strategies for combining artistic ambition with practical safety considerations, and whether it might be wise to rehearse collaborative pieces before presenting them to distinguished guests. Dawn arrives gently over the castle walls, painting the stone battlements with golden light that speaks of new beginnings, fresh possibilities, and the eternal cycle of medieval life, continuing regardless of the previous evening's artistic adventures. The morning air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of autumn leaves, wood smoke, and the faint, lingering aroma of last night's feast. Our visiting guests prepare for departure with the efficient bustle of people who travel frequently, but their conversations suggest that this particular stop will be remembered long after they've forgotten the details of less memorable accommodations. Children excitedly recreate portions of the previous evening's entertainment, while adults engage in the kind of diplomatic praise that transforms potential criticism into fond memory. Sir Geoffrey appears for breakfast, looking remarkably well for someone who spent the previous evening wearing improvised classical costume while wielding torches and delivering dramatic oratory. Though there's evidence that artistic endeavor has physical consequences, including what appear to be small burns on his hands, wine stains on his regular clothing, and a slightly hoarse voice that suggests passionate declamation takes its toll on vocal cords. The morning conversation flows between practical matters of travel, weather, road conditions, and the kind of gentle teasing that indicates successful social bonding. The visiting Baron shares stories from his own entertaining disasters, including an incident involving a trained bear, a visiting archbishop, and what he describes as a misunderstanding about the nature of religious music. These stories remind everyone present that the gap between artistic ambition and practical achievement is a universal human experience, that people in every castle, every court, every community struggle with the challenge of creating entertainment that's simultaneously impressive and safe, memorable and appropriate, culturally refined and actually comprehensible. Let yourself relax into these peaceful morning moments, the gentle sounds of departure preparations, friendly farewells, and the satisfied atmosphere of hospitality successfully provided. It's the kind of scene that has played out in castle courtyards for centuries, the eternal rhythm of guests arriving, being entertained, and departing with stories to tell and memories to treasure. Eleanor supervises the departure preparations with the same efficient attention she brings to all household management, ensuring that guests leave with appropriate provisions for their journey, small gifts as mementos of their visit, and diplomatic assurances that they'll be welcomed back whenever their travels bring them this direction. Her manner suggests genuine pleasure in their company, as well as relief that artistic experimentation concluded without requiring serious medical attention. The castle gradually returns to normal routine as the guests disappear down the road in a colorful procession of horses, wagons, and retainers. But normal routine, in Sir Geoffrey's household, has its own potential for entertainment. Today's activities already include plans for improving last night's performance, experimenting with new artistic combinations, and possibly attempting to teach Charlemagne the Rooster to participate in future dramatic presentations. Sir Roland has convinced himself that his lute's singed strings actually improve its sound quality, and is planning to deliberately modify other instruments to achieve similar tonal effects. This project combines his musical interests with his love of experimentation in ways that probably ensure future entertainment, though whether that entertainment will be musical remains to be determined. Sir Thomas is sketching plans for what he calls improved interpretive combat staging, which involves props, costume modifications, and what appears to be a small catapult. His artistic vision continues to evolve in directions that suggest future performances will be even more memorable than previous efforts. Eleanor makes mental notes about additional safety precautions. The morning progresses with the comfortable predictability of castle routine, breakfast conversations, household planning, weapons practice that occasionally incorporates artistic elements, whether intended or not. It's the gentle rhythm of medieval life, where every day brings opportunities for friendship, laughter, creativity, and the kind of human connection that makes existence meaningful, regardless of historical era. And so we leave Sir Geoffrey, Sir Roland, Sir Thomas, and all the wonderfully human knights of medieval times as they settle into another day of mock-heroic adventures, gentle mischief, artistic experimentation, and the kind of friendship that transcends centuries. Their laughter echoes softly across the years, reminding us that people have always found ways to create joy, to entertain each other, and to transform ordinary moments into extraordinary memories. Let their stories drift gently through your mind as you settle towards sleep, the sound of dice on wooden tables, the splash of bathhouse conversations, the gentle chaos of feast halls where entertainment creates itself from the simple pleasure of human company, the whispered adventures of night wandering, and the satisfied exhaustion of performers who have given everything to their art, regardless of conventional measures of success. These medieval knights, with their elaborate pranks and questionable artistic judgment, remind us of something profound about human nature, that the ability to laugh, to play, to create entertainment from whatever materials life provides. These aren't luxuries to be enjoyed only after serious business is completed, but rather essential elements that make serious business bearable, survivable, and ultimately meaningful. Perhaps tonight, you'll dream of stone castles where friendship matters more than dignity, of warm hearths where stories grow in the telling, of people who understood instinctively that the best defense against life's hardships is a well-developed sense of humor and a willingness to risk embarrassment in pursuit of genuine entertainment. If these tales have brought you peace, if they've helped you remember that people across all centuries have been beautifully, wonderfully, reassuringly human, perhaps you might share that comfort with someone else who needs gentle stories and peaceful dreams. Or if you found rest in these historical wanderings, you might consider subscribing for more journeys through time's treasure house of human joy and folly. Close your eyes now. Let your breathing deepen and slow. Feel yourself sinking into the comfortable knowledge that across centuries and continents, people have always gathered around fires and tables, shared food and stories, created laughter from simple ingredients, and found in each other the companionship that makes any hardship endurable. Picture Sir Geoffrey finally settled into his own bed, listening to Eleanor's gentle breathing, reflecting on a day filled with the small adventures that make life worth living, planning tomorrow's entertainments. Grateful for friends who share his appreciation for the ridiculous content in the knowledge that he lives in a world where joy is always possible, where laughter is always welcome, where the worst that can happen to a performance is that it becomes a better story. The castle sleeps peacefully around them, servants and nobles, guests and residents, children and adults, all resting in the security of community, friendship, and the eternal human understanding that tomorrow will bring new opportunities for mischief, new chances for laughter, new stories to be born from the endless creativity of people who refuse to let dignity override humanity. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your rest be deep and peaceful, your sleep filled with gentle laughter, your dreams populated by friends who know that the finest entertainment comes not from perfection, but from the loving attempt to create something beautiful, something memorable, something worth sharing with people who matter. Sleep well until we meet again, in another time, another place, another gentle story from history's collection of human joy, where nights were human, art was an adventure, and every day held the promise of something wonderfully, memorably, ridiculously entertaining. And if you drift off before this story ends, know that Sir Geoffrey and his friends will continue their adventures, their pranks, their questionable artistic endeavors, and their eternal quest to prove that life, even in the most formal circumstances, even under the most serious obligations, even in the face of genuine hardship, is always, always worth celebrating. Good night, rest well, and dream of castles where laughter echoes through stone halls, where friendship conquers embarrassment, and where the greatest adventures begin with someone saying, "I have an idea. What could possibly go wrong?" Sweet dreams.